Good evening, chat. How's it going? Hope everybody's having a good night. Should be getting pretty close to approaching the weekend, getting a little antsy to do all kinds of fun stuff. Well, I've got some fun stuff of my own planned, and we're going to start the weekend out right. I've got a very special guest for us, somebody that I've talked to back and forth on Twitter for a while. This is going to be Paul Gale from Paul Gale Network, awesome friend of the channel, and all of his links will be below. So if you don't sub to this guy, definitely go do that. Fantastic dude. But I'm going to turn it over to him and let him tell you a little bit about himself, and then we will go from there. Paul, introduce yourself.
Cool. Hey, Zoo, and hey, everyone listening. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Paul, or, Paul Gale Network, as the little company that I began back in 2007. Major into video games, martial arts, all that good stuff. And yeah, I've been covering video games for over 20 years professionally, but have been a fan since I was 4 years old. So that's actually the same time that I got into martial arts. So those two hobbies of mine for the last 36 years, I've been just kind of running parallel: video games, martial arts. Been to 20 E3s, covering for different sites along the way. Back in the day, gamers.com, oneup.com, bitmob.com. A
Holy
couple years
shit.
ago, was Shagbag, and then like Paul Gale Network conceptualized like back in '06, but as a website began in 2007. And then my first E3 was 2000, but that was even before working for any of the sites. That was a whole other story. But yeah, that's a little drop about me.
Well, I've got kind of similar backstory in terms of I think I was around 4 or 5. I'm not sure which. Eventually, want to have my dad on here to kind of clear up some of the false memories because once you get that far back, it gets a little hazy, man. And
Yeah.
I kind of want to know. I know it all started with a hand-me-down NES system, is where it started for me. So I wasn't around for the Atari or the golden age of the arcade games. But I was around at the start of that. I did get a little bit of the arcade in the '90s. Pizza Hut arcade experience, the Street Fighter phenomenon where they had all the
Oh
tournaments,
yeah.
things of that nature, for sure. But yeah, that's a good time to be around. So what was it? What was it that kickstarted your love of both video games and martial arts? What was your entryway, your gateway game? Would you say?
Dang. The first big game that I remember was Super Mario Brothers, but I don't think that's the first game I ever played. When I was really young, like 4 years old, my parents had a small it was like a gaming computer, I guess you could call it that. Uh, and it was called a TI-94A. It was basically a keyboard, and on the right side of it, if I'm not mistaken, was a cartridge slot, and it was a one cartridge thing at a time that you could, throw in there. So rewind back to 1987, and it was very basic stuff like Pong, a typing program, Snake, Maze, like that kind of stuff. But I had been seeing advertisements of NES online, or not, not online. I got to rewind back, on TV commercials. Walk by arcade, Pizza Hut. So I was familiar with Donkey Kong and Mario, but didn't have an NES myself. But then played it at a friend's house, and then when I played Super Mario Brothers for the first time on a friend's NES, then I was hooked. That music hit me hard. That gameplay, and it was wonderful.
Yeah.
I as a little kid, that far back, I remember going with my mom, and like the grocery store had a like a Donkey Kong cartridge on sale, and I thought it was like a VHS tape because I was also obsessed with King Kong as a little kid, and I wanted it, and so that was my early fascination with Donkey Kong. Was as a kid thinking, well, it's kind of like King Kong, one of my favorite movies, but didn't have an NES yet until 1989. So 6-year-old me, that was my first traditional video game console, even though I had been playing a little bit of, you know, Super Mario Brothers up until then and some other Nintendo titles in the arcades as well. Street Fighter was a very early one for me. So kind of this mid to late 80s time period was so big and pivotal and cool. And then on the martial arts side, uh, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. As a big Turtles
Oh,
kid,
yes.
that was my jam. That, and to a lesser extent, initially, Street Fighter. Street Fighter very soon would become instrumental in my martial arts growth, but in the beginning, TMNT was like that set me off. And being this '80s kid, was all Cowabunga, Ninja Turtles, Super Mario Brothers, and then Street Fighter bigger and bigger. I would do my training, and then like next door, go to the 7-Eleven and play Street Fighter 2, and I still have my uniform on and be playing, and then go home and play Super Mario World. By that time, Super NES had eventually come out, and
Oh, yeah.
uh, yeah, this just going to arcades, early days, playing Donkey Kong, playing Pac-Man. There was never like anything that I didn't like. All these franchises were emerging at once in the kind of the NES era, which was really a cool time to grow up with it. Then you got to see all the things grow in the last 36 years for me.
Yeah, and my friend Brandon from Just a Gems, another great channel, brings up, it's very rare that we actually get to see a hobby develop in our lifetime to get to an entertainment medium. If you look at like the oldest books, or if you look at the oldest movies, even, those were turn of the century. Books have been around forever. Video games, we've literally got to see this medium grow, and we got to be there for the dawn of the birth of an entertainment medium, which I think is a hell of a time to do that. And I love how you mentioned King Kong, and there's
Yeah,
in the NES, and how big Mario was at the time. And I'll tell you, we're on like another planet. We're in a whole other galaxy from some of the newer gamers, because there's so much gaming history that gets lost. So much of that ludology, so much of that gaming history is just lost to time. And back me up. I mean, my memory is a little hazy, because again, I was a wee lad at the time, but I distinctly remember the cartridge shortage of 1988, for example. People literally, like these games that people now describe as black sheeps, like Zelda 2, Mario 2. No, no, man. People literally would go across state lines. They would line up around the block to get those two sequels.
yeah,
It was an incredible time. I always like to point to, there's a John Stossel video from the 80s that literally shows this. And like it's or the fact that Nintendo gets a lot of flack for some of how protective they are over their franchises, much like Disney, also very protective. But you also have to look at their experiences with King Kong, you mentioned, and the fact that they
hmm
literally had a huge knockdown, drag out lawsuit that set legal precedent. And literally, King Kong, they lost that because they didn't keep up with their patents, and they didn't actively protect it. So that's a lot of what's going on at play. Again, I'm not saying there's good guys or bad guys here, but I can definitely see, given Nintendo's experience and that being burned into their DNA, I can see why they would be so protective over some of their properties in particular.
yeah, they really are, and they have to, because you look at history and you learn from past companies' mistakes, and you don't want that to happen. And when you have a successful juggernaut like Mario, and to an extent Donkey Kong and The Legend of Zelda, Metroid,
Right.
all of them. I mean, look at how often Eternal Darkness gets re-upped, and they haven't touched it in 20 years, but they still don't want to lose it. They still care about the characters, and that's still their ownership. So
Fingers
yeah, I
crossed.
get
That's
it.
that's a GameCube
I,
game I'm actually interested in playing. So fingers crossed
that
on
would
that for sure, man.
that
Um,
would be a fun one to see come back. But like you said, I like that you mentioned it. It's really cool. I mean, there's no too late of a time to become a gamer. I have two kids. They're 8 and 6, and for their sake, well, luckily for them, I guess their dad is a giant video gamer that has all of my old stuff, actively buys new stuff, but just the way they're playing it is kind of out of order. But there's just so much of everything nowadays that it builds up. We were built up a little bit differently. We had to wait. We went through droughts. We were there for the birth of these franchises. It's
yeah.
kind of different when you were, I played, the first Zelda in like spring of 80. Oh gosh, probably like spring of '88. So it's probably a couple of years old, because Yeah, probably because I think it came out in like February of '86, so probably
Hmm.
2 years afterwards, spring '88. So almost 5-year-old me getting to play it, and how different it was than Super Mario Brothers, which was my first Nintendo franchise. Unless if Donkey Kong played first in the arcades, potentially, and then like Metroid also playing it at a friend's house. Also probably like summer '88, just a couple of years later. I'll never forget. And I appreciate so much how the medium has evolved. I wasn't there from the beginning of comic books. Comic books were around for, decades until I got into it.
Right.
But with video games, now you could say true. Being born in '83, I wasn't around from the very, very start of it, but close enough that you could still say that was the infancy of gaming,
Uh-huh.
relatively. So
Yeah,
that's why
it's
we hold
it's no
so much.
Space Wars, but it's close enough for government work, man.
Yeah. And you just get this appreciation and this fandom of all these all these nostalgic classic franchises that you know just love so much.
Well, and I love that, just like the old literary works of lore, I love that we're now starting to see video games be inspired by video games in the past. The hits from today are coming from the hits of the past. I mentioned a lot of people were surprised, but yeah, Pac-Man, fucking Pac-Man, literally inspired Grand Theft Auto 3. Zelda's inspiring tons of games. Chrono Trigger is getting a revival with games like Sea of Stars, games like Chained Echoes. Um, it's just we're starting to now see where the old guard of video, like if you look at the old video game developers, like Richard Garriott was the son of astronauts. Miyamoto was an industrial designer. And they had real world experiences to pull from, because at the time there were no there I mean, there were a few. I mean, they looked at games like Ultima, they looked at Wizardry, looked at games like Pitfall, but in general there wasn't a whole lot to pull from, which is where you get the story of Miyamoto, like coming out of the woods and seeing a
Yeah,
bridge across the lake, and there's a cave across that bridge, that famous story. And so, he paired his understanding of games like Ultima, games like Wizardry, and paired that with the open world experiences he had as a real person. That's what he had. But now you're actually
yeah,
starting to see it where they're replicating other video game works, just like you would see in the old days, with books replicating famous works, and you're starting to see that in gaming. It's just super cool, man.
it is. I love it. And I give a lot of credit for the early folks that came up with the stuff first, and not to discredit anybody that's innovating based off of an old technology or of an old character. It's not like, oh, you're just copying them because they're using a sword. That wouldn't be really fair. Like, come on, someone's going to use a sword in a game eventually. But you always got to give a little bit of respect to, this was the company that first side scrolled. This is the first one that you know, implemented this, whether it was speech or rumble or, to whomever. And it's really impressive to see how far it's come. And like you said, one thing inspiring off the other. I was just talking to a student the other day because when I'm not doing video game stuff, I'm a university professor. So I teach martial arts classes and whatnot. And,
Awesome.
I talk to my students who are, of a different age group for the most part, but they're like, "Oh man, what was it like when?" Because we even though it's a university course, we still talk about video games and stuff like that while we're stretching, warming up,
Hell
and
yeah.
I get fun questions like, "Ah, what do you think of old tricks that developers had to use?" That's another thing. Now there is no limitation in what you could do in a game. If you could think it, polygons, the processing power, the teraflops, the gigs of RAM, you are without limitation. And uh, there are, I should say, engines out there that folks create for others to use, right? Unreal, Unity, etc.
Right.
But back then, you had to be kind of extra creative in, how do I want to distinguish this character's face from his overalls? Put in a mustache. How can we use this texture again, and within the limitations of how much power we have, make a cloud and make that look distinguished from a shrub. Well, let's change the color palette a little bit.
Mhm.
I'm giving some Super Mario Brothers references. Or look at how that 3D camera angle worked. I'm sure you've seen it online in The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time,
Oh yeah.
which at a time was a modern game. That was already a good 15 years after the Famicom came out. 1998 from '83, and just how you never thought that it would have been a cube that you were in for the sky. It felt like a living, breathing world. Ah,
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
it's cool stuff.
And that's the thing. Like you bring up the in terms of the growth of gaming and the fact that the sky's the limit. Like, yeah, absolutely, man. Like, and in fact, sometimes I feel like it works against us. This is something I wanted to talk to you about because you've had kind of a front row seat to this. So one of my concerns, especially if you look at the PlayStation 5, you look at the Xbox Series X, and you look at some of these newer systems, they've got the specs that the sky's the limit, and yet it looks like we're finally starting to see the diminishing return of that sustaining innovation of graphics and specs. And I'm not necessarily as convinced that it's because they can't do it so much as because what these systems are doing, it doesn't seem like it's outputting for us as much as it's outputting for developers to optimize their games less. Look at a game like Metal Gear Solid Collection. You're
Hmm.
telling me you can't fit an MSX game on a Nintendo Switch cart? There's not one of those games that's on the entire fucking cart, Paul. And so you got to, it makes me kind of wonder as a customer, like, are these specs being used to my benefit, or are these specs being used to allow companies like Konami to get away with not optimizing their games?
Yeah. It see, I don't know the file size on that one in particular, but I wouldn't be surprised if just a hair more and it's going over 16 gigs and they want to keep it as a cheaper cartridge, for instance,
Right.
in that case. But yeah, well, that's a good thing to look up. Well, we could look it up or talk about that another time. But I guess
Definitely.
sometimes it's trying to maximize that dollar, and other times, is it worth it? I don't know.
It just sucks for me because I love physical games. You have
Yeah,
no
same
idea
here.
how much I was looking forward to playing Metal Gear Solid on my Switch. I never got to play them. So the only one I really got to play, I got to try MGS4 a little bit, never finished it. And I got to try a little bit of Metal Gear Solid 1, but in general, most of that series is completely unknown to me because it's just a system I skipped largely was the PlayStation systems.
Hmm.
And so getting to play that physical, but again, I'm kind of a physical only gamer, so it's like, well, so much for that. But eventually I'll get to play it. I think I'm gonna finally. I think there's a Metal Gear Solid collection on the Vita, and I just finally got a Vita for Vita Island. So maybe I get to play it there. But the other thing you mentioned is the fact that it's pretty cool. So you're a university professor, and it's good to see that the same tricks work even nowadays. Because we had a teacher named Mr. Brian, math teacher, and we could literally get him off subject just by talking about the day.
That's funny. That's funny.
Literally, he would be on the white drawing diagram how to get across the bridge on Siphon Filter. Like,
Yeah.
like an awesome experience. So now you said you've been to how many E3s?
20.
20 E3s. Oh my gosh. So what are some standout E3 moments for you? Like being like in the live scene, because I've gone to a few cons, never gone to an E3 before. There had to be some pretty badass moments there. So
Oh, it's the best. Every E3, first of all, has always been my favorite, day or lump of days in the year. Like, uh, I like wrestling. I used to watch more, and WrestleMania is cool. Super Bowl is cool. Olympics coming once in every 4 years. That's pretty cool. But like, man, for me, E3 is the best 3 day period of the year, and that's like been life from 2000 through 2019. So there is no bad in-person show. And I'll say this, to set the stage of just how much I love the event. Even at an E3 where there are not as many like hit titles that necessarily resonate with you, like from your favorite franchises or whatever,
right.
the show itself, nothing quite like being in person, because the booths, the people, the networking, the the swag, the friends, the shirts that you get and see, and stories that you share, the funny moments that happen in line, the street passes, like everything, But some standout ones, my first one was really unique. It was 2000. It was supposed to be 99, but ended up being 2000. And I was 16 years old. So I got in through Konami, and, technically 2 years under the proper age to go, but I was able to go in, allowed. And, it was 2000 is so long ago, man. There was no
I feel
Xbox
old. I
yet,
feel so
right?
old.
May of 2000, there was no Xbox. It was, Nintendo 64, PlayStation 2 on the horizon in the United States, because it would come out that October, and Sega Dreamcast. Like, that's how crazy old E3 was when I went. And for me, the big thing was, well, two things. One, it was playing PlayStation 2 and having that Metal Gear Solid 2 up close and personal, which was awesome. But really, the Nintendo booth. Nintendo's my overall favorite video game company, I will say. I mean, I play everything, but
same.
Nintendo is they are my favorite. And yeah, that's an easy answer. But I love everything, But Nintendo's booth, oh, geez, I got to play Perfect Dark. That was one of the first games I played at E3.
Now, Perfect Dark was one of the few N64 games that I love that game.
That was like a top contender of that time for like one of the best games ever made.
Oh man!
But when that came out, that was so high up there for me in May of 2000. It only came out like a couple of weeks after the E3, so I didn't get. It was not like one of those games I got to play months and months in advance, like some of them are. But that one, it was still really cool to play it. Conker's Bad Fur Day had its own unique section within the booth. That was super cool. The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, that was an October release game. So that was neat to get to play it 5 months early. Mario Tennis, I think, was there. And my first E3 was sweet. Sorry, you were going to say something. I think
Oh no, you're
want to
fine.
cut you off.
I just wanted to say, yeah, with Perfect Dark, like I'll never forget my cousin like playing the multiplayer and loading up like the maximum amount of sims and making them peace sims. And so literally it was chaos just trying to keep a damn firearm in your hands. And we would hole up and we would just blast them and we would try, but eventually they would get in and they would disarm you and you'd have like the dizzy. There were so many fun things you could do with that game. We also did like the Scatter Wars, where you had like the alien rocket launcher that you could heat seek, and so we would stand on opposite ends of the map, and we would shoot those rockets, and we'd have to pilot the rockets at each other. There's just so many novel things you could do in that game's engine, man. That was a legitimately fun Nintendo 64 game. And keep in mind, my perspective is I'm a gamer that came from the I never wanted to leave the Super Nintendo and the Genesis era. A lot of that gaming was kind of alien to me at first. I'm like, man, I don't know about all this 3D stuff. So there was a few games that Dad got the N64, and that was a system he bought for us. And he got Shadows of the Empire was one of the first games he got for it, and then GoldenEye was one of the first games, and both of those games really fun. Like tying the ATs around, like in the I remember the snow mission and the jetpack mission and Shadows of the Empire. Back when licensed games actually would be good on occasion, which they still are. If you haven't played The Mummy Demastered on Switch, great license game. Great. Better than the movie it's based on, actually.
I think that's by Way Forward. Right?
Yeah. Way Forward. Yeah. Anything they touch is pretty good, man.
Yeah, they're great.
Yeah, great company, but yeah, I can't imagine being there. So were you there for any like system debuts?
Well, in a way, yeah, because PS2 had just come out in March, but this was US's first one. So
okay,
if you count that, like technically it was out, but still sort of. I was there at that next E3 2001. That was a big one because it was Nintendo GameCube first time. And because it wasn't out in Japan yet, not till September, US in November. So getting to play GameCube was epic. And Xbox also there for the first time after the Bill Gates, unveil, I think at the CES a couple months earlier. So got to play GameCube. PS2 was already out by then, but still fairly new. And Xbox. So that was a really big E3 as well, and that's kind of the E3 that sort of got my jump start into the video game industry
Okay.
because I was already doing things, but just fateful encounters and making the best out of a good situation and talking to the right people and keeping up with relationships, and that's kind of what propelled me back then. Uh, so that was memorable. Another big one in 2006, getting to play
The
Wii for the first time.
Nintendo Wii that was the console that brought me back into the hobby, like full speed. Like that
Hmm.
was the one that I absolutely adored. New Super Mario Brothers Wii, adored Xenoblade. Was big part of Project Rainfall. I was a rainmaker. In terms of just I would say I shouldn't overinflate that. I was a big petition signer. I wasn't an organizer or anything. But
It's still cool. I remember that time with
yeah,
yeah.
and again, not only did we get Xenoblade, but we also kind of changed Nintendo's heart in terms of the region locking because of that effort. And so that was a monumental effort. But man, being there for the dawn of the PlayStation 2 Xbox era and getting to see some of that live, yeah, Bill. Um, I'll tell you, Sony scared the shit out of Microsoft back in those days. They
Oh
absolutely
yeah.
scared the shit out of Microsoft, especially when Ken Kataragi started talking about kind of moving downstream and threatening Windows. And I think that's what led to the Xbox. It seems like that was kind of a shield initiative to kind of protect Windows, that golden goose. And I'll tell you, from where I'm looking, and I don't have kind of the insider perspective, but it looks like it kind of worked because you see Sony following a lot of the same things that Microsoft follows now. They've kind of abandoned their idea of exclusive games. They're putting more and more games on PC, which of course a majority is going to be on Windows now. You've got the PlayStation Plus, kind of the Games Pass. Not that Nintendo doesn't do
Yeah.
it as well with the Nintendo Switch Online, but like in terms of winning the war, I think Microsoft met their primary objective because Microsoft doesn't give a shit what you play on, as long as you play on Games Pass. And I think they were successful in protecting Windows, at least for now. Now part of what I think the Steam Deck is I think it's an early. I think it's because it's based on Linux architecture. I think that Steam putting its feelers out from trying to divorce itself from Windows. So we'll see how that develops. But in general, like the birth of that era and another legitimate third player coming in, that had to have been really interesting to watch, especially as somebody getting their start in the industry.
Yeah. I was, an avid reader of, the video game magazines of the era, Electronic Gaming Monthly, Nintendo Power, Game Pro, Game Fan, etc. So this was like my obsession throughout elementary school and early high school.
Right.
And then now getting to live and be a part of that industry and go and cover things. And internet still is kind of new at that time. 2000 internet's not like, decade old, couple decades old. It's uh, maybe 3 years old for most people. Maybe a little bit earlier, but like my first internet experience was kind of mid '90s, late '90s. And then it just got bigger. So it was a really cool time. I think another positive one that I can think of off the top of my head was E3 2005, getting to play The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess for the first time when it was still a GameCube game, or was it '04? It was '04 or '05, and Nintendo in their booth had its own Twilight Princess booth, which was dungeon this dungeon section of a castle, and you walked in. I actually have an E3 video up if you want to check it out sometime on
Hell yeah.
YouTube.
We'll
It's like
definitely look at that.
it's pretty cool. And Nintendo was always known for their booths. They had like an animatronic wolf link that would go off and
See,
howl.
that's cool as shit. See, right
Uh,
there, that's awesome.
oh, and imagine me like being a kid at this point, like a 22-year-old kid, having experienced these things, dreaming up of my own Nintendo world, Nintendo land that would one day happen. And then now I'm getting to live in these giant things. It only made me further want, gosh, please, you could find a way how to take all this stuff that you've put in these E3s, put it in an exhibit, and call that Nintendo World or Nintendo Land, and it would be the coolest place ever. Whatever happens to these giant things? Because like this Zelda booth was awesome. There was a Stalfos knight, clanging his sword against the um,
Nice.
what's it called? Like bars, because he was like in prison, sort of behind you. There
Right.
were these you know holographic kind of fish on the floor, and you could put your hand over it, and your shadow would affect them. Like such a cool booth. Vines hanging everywhere. Metal Gear Solid 3 was another one that was really cool, where they, Konami had a in their Konami booth, they had like their separate Metal Gear Solid section, and it was just like you're in a jungle, walking around. For Peter Jackson's King Kong, the video game, they had like a whole big King Kong Skull Island kind of set up. I love it, man. Like the spectacle, the amount of effort that goes into the show. Never been a bad show. Wii U playing it for the first time, also fun. That beautiful Legend of Zelda Next Gen demo that was hands on. You got to play it, but it was kind of like a demo, but just to show that it was real time. Do you know which one I'm talking about? You
Yeah,
use like the
the bait and switch.
realistic graphics.
Yeah.
That thing, gosh, that thing was gorgeous. That's my personal hope. Like, if I had to pick a visual style for the next Zelda game, I loved Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, but go back to that. I want that game next. I think with Zelda, it's nice to see different visual styles where you had realistic for the time, which was like Ocarina. You had cell shaded Wind Waker, totally different. Back to realistic Twilight Princess, something in between kind of for Skyward Sword, and then now
Right.
we have a new style, like an anime-ish style for the last couple. Go back. I'd say my pick would be go back to that realistic look, and
Oh yeah,
then
for
do
sure, for
whatever
sure.
next.
And I agree with you
But
on that. My whole thing is I've always viewed Zelda through the lens of dark fantasy. Okay,
mm,
so basically it's things like Sword in the Stone, it's Sleeping Beauty, King Arthur. It's that dark fantasy motif, Lord of the Rings to some extent, but it's that dark fantasy of a fallen world that has fallen to evil and darkness. All of my favorite Zeldas take place in what Anuma would brand the failure universe, basically, where the world has fallen to evil. I think it makes for a far more interesting world. And I remember the backlash to that art style with Wind Waker. And I said at the time, I said that's not actually what people are upset about. Everybody's screaming about the art style. I think what that was it was a very visceral, easy to identify change that people could latch onto and cry about. But I actually think that what people were really upset about, at least what I was upset about at the time, was I think there was a clash in terms of my definition of Zelda as a fan and E.G. Aonuma's definition of Zelda as a person who literally came forward and claimed, he said, "Yeah, I can't beat the Octo Rocks in Zelda 1. So, what kind of games do I like?" Well, the games, I think he literally he said that this is not a game I think I would like to make. So, what kind of game would I like to make? Well, that would be point and click PC adventure games. Those are games where you don't have to have those traditional gaming reflexive skills. And so, that's the kind of game I think I would like to make. And slowly over time, I think you saw Zelda turn from that game that was described in the Nintendo Fan Magazine as the best of both worlds,
mhm.
an action RPG, to a game that more resembled like an adventure game, a PC adventure game in some ways. The tutorials got longer, the puzzles got more akin to an Incredible Machine or a Rube Goldberg machine, and slowly but surely, the combat focus got lost. The navigating mazes, navigating the overworld began to shrink. And I think that backlash started with Wind Waker, even though it really began sooner. Um, which kind of leads us full speed because he had Skyward Sword, and I know it sold 3 million copies, but I think that had to, especially with other rising games like Dark Souls, literally coming out of nowhere and literally outselling it, despite, of course, it is on multi console. But that's what led us to Breath of the Wild. And lo and behold, Breath of the Wild is developed with the OG Legend of Zelda in mind. And it's developed on a modified NES engine. And it goes back to that dark fallen world, that combat focus. There are puzzles there, but the puzzles are much more open, just like they were in the original game. And lo and behold, the game is now outselling Mario consistently. And so I
You,
I
yeah. No, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
No. Go ahead. Yeah, I've been over there rambling.
No, good. Like I like it. Good conversation. Yeah, definitely continue. But I'll just I laugh because like, man, you said it. We've got a couple of the best selling entries in franchise history, and just these two Zelda games, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, they make up for, I think, let me get this right. I think 1/3 of all the sales of all Zelda games combined come from these two games.
Yeah, it
So
is.
in this 6 year span, 6 year span, Zelda is like 36 years old. So in 1/6 the time, they've made up for 1/3 the sales. So they are punching above their weight.
Oh,
It's like 50 million copies between the two.
monstrously
Amazing.
above their weight. I did the macro because one of the things I'm fond of. Anybody who knows me knows I drone on about macroeconomics, right? And
Mhm.
so one of the things I talk about is that direct comparisons across time are useless. And what I mean by that is let's take a look at what was going on in 1986. Half the world was behind an iron curtain, for example, is the example I gave OJ. You had population increase, massive. Population is much larger in 2017 than it is in 1986. So one of the things I often do is I don't do all the yield curves and things of that nature, things you would have to do in order to do a true macroeconomic analysis, because fuck that, pay me if I'm going to do that much work. But what I will do is I will do a simple population increase adjustment. So what that does is you take the population at the time the game came out, take the population and you adjust that, and then you basically take that sales percentage. So let's say there was a 54% population increase. What you would simply do is you take the amount of Legend of Zelda copies, you increase that by 54%, and then you do that number and you add that percentage, whatever that sales number would be, to the total, and then you get an actual, not a one for one comparison, but you get a comparison that's much closer to what a true comparison would be. And what is
That is
impressive,
closer. That is more fair.
yes,
Yeah.
and what is impressive about the Legend of Zelda is it does something that a lot of these older franchises don't do. It blows the original game out of the fucking water. Adjusted for population, the original Legend of Zelda, and again, it probably is higher than this. Keep that in mind, because again, there was no brand name recognition for Legend of Zelda. Zelda wasn't available to half the globe. Um, there were less gamers because we just had the Atari crash. There's all kinds of there was a cartridge shortage. A lot of the OG Nintendo games weren't even available again after 1988 until later on in the life because of the cartridge shortage. They couldn't do reprints in 1988. So
And news spread slower. There wasn't
yes,
any internet to do it around.
absolutely.
NES had a structured release where Famicom was 83, United States was 85,
Uh-huh.
Europe was 86, I think Australia was 87. So
Right.
yeah,
So
to all
staggered
these for all
releases.
these old games, yeah.
But that said, just doing the simple population increase, OG Zelda would have sold 14 million copies. And so if you adjust for population on all the Zelda games, I think the only game that outsells OG Zelda prior to that, let me pull up my Zelda research doc real quick because I want to get
Yeah, this
this
is good.
right. Zelda research doc, there it is. All righty, and yes, I do have that. I am that much of a dork. Let's see. So the inflation calculator we are looking at. So that's inflation. That's a different thing. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for okay, here's the decline. So, unless you're an old school gamer, you would not remember how heavily copied Zelda games were. I'm not looking for that. Ocarina of Time. Z targeting is revolutionary. Love the 3D world. Let's see. Ocarina 7.6 million sales. Not great when you consider Final Fantasy actually 7 on the PlayStation out. So that's not what I'm looking for. Okay, no, it was actually with population growth. Yeah, it was Ocarina. Ocarina, if you added population in, would have outsold OG Zelda. But in general, the point I'm making is 14 million sales. So OG Zelda was the top seller, aside from Ocarina, I think. Maybe Twilight Princess. I'd have to look at that, but it's close. And but then you have Breath of the Wild that comes along and does 30 million copies. Like, even adjusted for
Yeah.
population, it just destroys that record. And so those games have really tied on to something. And I think part of it is just being able to explore and lose yourself in an open world that feels dangerous again. Like, literally, the first time you fight a Lionel in that game, the first time you see a dragon pop up in that game, and then Tears of the Kingdom did something which I wouldn't have believed possible, and it did it again. So I'm enamored by what Enuma has done. I've been very hard on Eiji Onuma as a fan,
Mm.
and I've got to tell you, he has earned every bit of goodwill I now heap on him.
I think these two are genre defining, generation defining games.
Yes.
You know, if you had to recommend somebody a video game to play within the last decade, it's an easy Breath of the Wild for me. And
Yeah.
you know, Tears of the Kingdom does some things better. I still give the nod to Breath of the Wild
Me
as
too.
being my personal favorite
Me
game.
too.
And I can acknowledge that. Well, Tears of the Kingdom has a little bit better draw distance, some extra texture work, you know, some extra things that you could do with the physics. But I give Breath of the Wild the respect for being. Actually, it is my favorite game of all time. Ocarina of Time was my favorite. That was my old favorite, and it really meant a lot to win over. It wasn't an easy thing to do, but it really deserved it. But yeah, it did enough to shake up video games and really reignite things. And like you look at 2017 on, so many games had clear inspiration from Breath of the Wild. With everything's got a glider in it now.
Uh-huh.
Everything's got nooks and crannies. I mean, same thing with Super Mario 64. Now everything you could collect. 24 of this, 64 of that, 128 of that, etc.
And what's interesting is I often point to also, I'm glad you mentioned that, because the DNA for the collectathon, Mario 64 popularized it. But again, you can often see the trends on things before that. And so the original the first time I distinctly remember collectathon gaming was actually Yoshi's Island. Was kind of the birth of the collectathon, and then was later popularized by Super Mario 64, which just took the N64 platformer. And again, I was always thrown off by the 3D games, and I loved Mario 64 as far as playing it goes. I'm like, yeah, this is a fun game. But what I always said was, because I was a 2D Mario fan, I said, yeah, this is fun. I can't wait to see what Nintendo does with this much hardware for the next 2D game. Joke's on me. I had to wait 18 years.
Man,
but it was worth the wait, because I always like to set the stage on this. So check this out, Paul. So put yourself back. It's 2008, right?
Yep, 2008.
The entire global economy is tailspin into decline. With it comes absolutely seismic shifts in the industry. I'm sure you remember this. The drawing and quartering of THQ, 250 studios going under, studio closures, layoffs, bad time to be in video games, or to be anywhere, really, right? Now, the general consensus is that things are going to begin to decline from here. And then, including the Wii, even the Nintendo Wii saw its momentum stall. And then comes New Super Mario Brothers Wii. This relic 2D game that shows up and immediately begins selling out Nintendo Wii's again for another 2 years.
Yeah, just when you thought everything was going to be either big 3D first-person shooters, as that was kind of the trend on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. Not that they didn't have other games, but that was definitely a genre that popped up a lot. Or Wii Remote, waggle things. Let's see Xbox come up with their own. Let's see PlayStation come up with Move.
Birdman, the absolute economic Birdman back then, just copying Nintendo.
Yep. But then, bam, like you said, old school 2D gamer system. I mean, old school 2D gaming game, on this 3D system. Hold your Wii Remote sideways. That was one of the draws. That was one of the promises early on. You could play it like this or this, and there's the perfect game to show that. And that was a really fun game. Like, I loved 2D Mario back in the day. Each old school Mario game felt like an event, even though I didn't have my own NES till '89. I felt the significance of Super Mario Bros. 2 coming out. I felt definitely the significance of Super Mario Bros. 3
Oh,
because
Mario
by
Mania.
then I was a Mario kid. Mario World, oh my gosh. Yoshi's Island, Mario World 2. And then, see, so for me, Super Mario 64 was just an incredible shift because I was fantasizing over those 2D pictures in those magazines for months. So the first time I got to play it, gosh, I was lucky that there was an import shop in Torrance that was kind of close to my grandma's house. So when my dad would take me there Saturday mornings, uh, we would stop by this video game store like before or after we'd visit.
Okay.
And I got to know early on, oh, this place has like Japanese games. Oh, that's kind of cool. You could buy a Japanese game which wouldn't work on my
That's
SNES, but
cool as hell.
they had this converter though. Oh, so I could play like this Dragon Ball Z game and not really be able to read it, but I could work my way around the menu. Okay, cool. And then all of a sudden, June 1996, N64 came out in Japan, and like a week later, so either late June or early July, which is close to my birthday,
Okay.
on my birthday is July 7th, I walked in there one day, and oh my gosh, there it was. The most beautiful thing I'd seen in my life. On their TV in the front of their room was an N64, and Super Mario 64 was just, playing on loop. And I knew there's no way that my dad's gonna get me this now. And I even knew myself, Paul, just wait. In 3 months, the N64 is gonna come out in the United States. You'll be okay. But I said, can I play it? Like, yeah, sure. You thinking about buying it? Well, maybe, but would like to try it honestly. And like, yeah, sure, you could play it, kid. Oh, it was so freaking cool. Like that moment, those moments, and so many of them, probably for you, for me, for all of us gamers, they stick with you for life. You kind of where you were in the time is sort of linked to when this game came out. What game was hot?
Oh
That's
God,
where
yeah.
you were in school. That's that best friend at the time. That's that job at the time. And for me, either barely turned a 13-year-old or super late 12-year-old me playing Super Mario 64 on this Japanese N64 was just magic. So that to see like once again Mario and me kind of went back so far, and that's just truly one of my favorite franchises of all time. Has really stood the test. And after a while, though, the 2D kind of ended, and then
Yeah,
you
I
came out,
know.
which revitalized, and then you went from new and being cool on DS to even better
Right.
on Wii. I love the Wii one.
The Wii one's
And then
my favorite.
no offense to New Super Mario Bros. 2 and New Super Mario Bros. U, but those last two I could have gone for personally, probably a different visual design. Still good
100
games.
100%.
It's just the old up until then, every 2D Mario was a main event. And those were the only two that I felt like I don't
Right.
know if they're main event.
Well, there's a reason
But
why.
3D,
Yeah, there's a reason
yeah,
why I
3D, I
refer
think.
to.
Mhm.
Sorry, but there's
No,
a
no,
reason
yeah,
I
sorry.
refer to Super Mario Brothers Wii as Super Mario Brothers 5. There's a reason for that. Is what I want to
Mm-hmm.
say. Absolutely. Um, for sure. Um, I said when that game came out that Nintendo could only get away with that once, and what I mean by that is not just visual style, not just the bop bop music. What I meant by that was the entire concept. So every Mario game, even some of the 3D games at the time, every new Mario game was an expansion, not just of Mario in terms of the mythology, but of the Mushroom World itself. And I don't think there's enough importance paid to the Mushroom Kingdom and the Mushroom World at large. Mario 1, you have the Mushroom Kingdom. Mario 2, you've got Subcon. Mario 3, you've got the Mushroom World with Bowser causing trouble throughout. Super Mario World takes us to Dinosaur Island, Dinosaur Land. Then you've got Super Mario 64, which gave us an in-depth look at Peach's castle. Even Mario Sunshine gave us Delfino Isle. And
Yeah.
then you get to New Super Mario Brothers Wii, and you get to Mario Galaxy. And while I like Mario Galaxy, that's where it starts to kind of detach from the world for me. You start to get these spheres just floating in space, and the games are cool. I'm sure. I've never actually played those games,
Oh my goodness!
But that's
You-
but
you-
it's on the list.
I
I promise.
recommend that.
I promise it's on the list because it's on the
Yeah.
Switch now, and I will play them. But essentially, with Mario, we got Plains World, Desert World, Fire World, Frost World.
Mhm.
And I said, okay, so it's the Mushroom Kingdom again. It's okay though, because it's the first time in 18 years. But Nintendo, gotta bring your A game next time. And I'll be damned, they did it again with New Super 2 and New Super U.
Yeah.
And that's what led us, and that's why Wonder is such a breath of further. I am fanboying out the likes of which you can't believe over Wonder.
Yeah. That was, Nintendo Live in general felt like an E3, a very Nintendo specific E3. And I think that if it was an E3, Super Mario Brothers Wonder was so good, it probably would have been one of my favorite games to play at an E3. Like if there was an E3 this year and just rewind back to June instead of September, 4th,
Right.
I would have been like, dang, I want to play that one again. Now I probably would have also had to play, and been looking forward to other Nintendo games and stuff at PlayStation, Xbox, Capcom, etc. But it's just such a good game. I played the demo 4 times.
Oh,
I
I
like
you, man.
there over and over. There was no wait. I mean, the wait was very little. One of the times I played was with OJ, Player
Right.
Essence, so whom you had on, and that was really cool. We were just having a good time, and the other couple of times I played was with Andre and Tom from Game Explain, and we had a really good time. So I play the game 4-player, 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 and I think 1-player, or maybe 4-4-2 and 1. So I got to have a good experience, and I don't think you're missing out if you don't have couch co-op with buddies. I think you're fine if you're single player. I think if you do have couch co-op, sweet. Online, I think the direction they went was also good. Some people were kind of thrown off like, oh, you're not making tangible contact with one another. Trust me, you probably don't want that almost. As appealing as it sounds, I think you're going to be okay and maybe even better with being able to see each other slightly clear, interact. You could talk on the phone, but not interfere because it's a game where too much is moving on. And unless if you're like in this intimate setting, you guys are going to mess each other up. You're going to hamper the experience in this kind of wild world if you're all physically bumping into each other online. So
Oh yeah,
that would be cool to have as an option, but the way they did it was fine. I mean,
as someone
yeah.
who wanted to kill my friends half the time while playing Mario Wii,
Yeah.
I can absolutely concur. There is nothing that makes you like want to split your friendships asunder, like playing like a Mario Party or a Mario game, or especially a game where you can knock each other off of the cliffs. Like, damn you, for sure.
See, in Splatoon, because Nintendo's not very big on voice chat, and in Splatoon, it works. I have played probably 99.8% of my lifetime played sessions in Splatoon 1, 2, and 3 online without talking to anybody ever. And that's just because I haven't needed to. I know my job. I know my mission. I go, I have fun. I'll click a booyah here or over here, there. And it's fun and it's cool. And like, it's not isolating. It's not antisocial. It's just that game doesn't really need it. It could. I mean, if you get better at playing and maybe more serious and you're playing for money and stuff, like, oh, okay, then formulate a good plan. But whether I'm playing with friends or strangers, like I said, like no joke, 99.8% of the time has been without it. And it's been just fine. With this game, I think you would have to, if it was to, hey, we need to do this together to make sure we're getting all of the blank, you're in my way. And with Nintendo not wanting to deal with that, and probably they're not dumb. They're a very intelligent company. I'm sure they, at one point when they were developing the game, had that as a potential. Let's experiment with online, set you up in 4 different rooms, have our beta testers play it.
Right.
Can it work? Yeah. Can we get the graphics and everything to work out so that it's still 60 frames per second? Potentially. But does it improve the experience or make it less fun? I don't. Some people I know that give Nintendo the proper credit, and some I think blame it on the Nintendo Switch wasn't strong enough to do it. That's not always the case. Sometimes it truly is a developer choice because they tested the heck out of it. They found out.
Hey, this doesn't work. So,
Yeah,
so speaking
maybe.
of which, I watched a new direct, and there was some stuff I really liked, and there was some stuff that really perplexed me, and I thought was pretty dookie tier. Now, one of the things that I was really, really angry about at first was F-Zero 99. But then I saw your post on it, and I got to thinking about how, in a way, it's kind of where F-Zero has always been heading, in a way. So I wanted you to tell me a little bit about why you think that's going to work really well for F-Zero, and if you think that can't be all we're getting. I'm hoping maybe it's leading to a future F-Zero project. But what are your thoughts on F-Zero 99?
So I have been playing it, and it's really fun. I think that Nintendo knew there's enough of an audience out there that's very vocal online that they want it, but the online people who bark the loudest don't necessarily make up the bulk of the actual gamers.
I think that's
Like
fair.
I'm gonna sidetrack and kind of like Pokemon. There was the let's not buy Pokemon Sword and Shield because not all 800 of my Pokemon are in the game.
Good luck.
Okay.
Good luck with that,
Some
boycott.
people, some people worried. Will this affect sales? Nintendo's like, okay, you 20,000 people that are talking loud make up a very small percentage of the 25 million people that we know are going to buy it, and the game was a massive hit, right? So you do have to listen to your audience, because if you muffle out, if you drown out everybody's complaints, you're going to eventually make a mistake. But how much weight do you put in it? Hard to say.
Yeah,
I think with Nintendo,
yeah, for sure.
you've got to listen, but you also have to stick to your own guns, talk to your investors, and know what you want to do as your company.
Well,
If everybody,
well, here's my concern. My concern is always, because keep in mind, I come at this from a little bit of a scarred perspective, because
mm,
I'm that 2D Mario fan that they didn't listen to for 18 years, and I actually think it did some damage to them. And I'm not saying that the 3D Mario games weren't successful, Paul. They certainly were. By any metric, they were successful. But if you look at the decline between the 2D Mario games and the 3D Mario games until very recently, Odyssey has closed the gap, no doubt. But
yeah,
there was a long time where they did not onboard folks like me. And and not
mm,
only that, but they didn't seem to be listening until it took them 18 years to make a new 2D Mario game. That's why I get worried. So that's why when I see an E3 like this, and again, the Nintendo Switch is my favorite system of all time. I love this thing, and if I don't get another damn game for it, I got to tell you, man, they've given me everything I want already. They've given me my 2D Mario. They've given me the glorious return of Metroid Dread, and they've given me
mm-hmm.
two fantastic Zelda games. I can't, at this point, I know I'm being greedy. I don't want the Switch to end. I want to see it past the DVD player eventually. Love to see that happen.
Yeah.
At least in a
I think
direct,
it.
at least in a direct comparison.
I
Um,
think by March 31st, 2026, it will be over 160 million.
right.
So far, I've called it right with 100 by here, 128 by here, and then 140, I presume, by
Okay.
March 31st next year. I've been on top of it with software sales, the 500 million mark by here, 3/4 by there, 1 billion with this. So, not to say that I can see in the future or that things
Right.
aren't going to change, but it definitely looks like they're heading in that direction. And like, sorry to deviate, I didn't answer the full question on F-Zero.
Oh
I
yeah.
think they care enough about the vocal minority to want to satisfy them, but I also think they finally had in mind something for F-Zero, because if it was just fans, they wouldn't necessarily do it. Just fans have been talking about Mother 3 forever, you know.
Yeah,
So if it
I
was if it
know.
was if it was just fans with F-Zero, it probably wouldn't be enough. I think it was a right combination of them having the right idea for it. Ironically enough, I said this the other day, I teased about it a couple of weeks ago that I was told something F-Zero is going to be at this Nintendo Direct
Right.
coming up soon. I didn't know what, but that's why I dropped a little F-Zero AX picture
Right.
of me at E3 like 2003. I was like, okay, I know something's going, but I didn't know what.
Well, I
But
figured
if
it would.
you,
A little birdie told me.
yeah, if you rewind though to E3 2018, so that was my, or, yeah, 2018, yeah, Nintendo Switch has already been out for like a year and 3 months. That was the first time I played Fortnite, which was at that E3. And I was talking to the Nintendo rep and the Fortnite rep because they're both kind of there demoing the game and like, what do you think? And like, oh, good fun. And like, so that's 100 people at a time. Wow, Fortnite wasn't new; it was already out for a year, but that was my first exposure to it, and I kind of had fun. And as I'm talking to one of my Nintendo friends, I said, you know what, you should do this with F-Zero. That's a franchise that I've heard repeatedly that nothing is happening because Nintendo doesn't know what to do with it. And unless if it's a new controller with a new control scheme or something different, they feel internally like the franchise has kind of met its top. And other than just better graphics, it's not going to necessarily improve the sales because they did better graphics over and over again with X and GX, and it didn't like progressively get better and better sales. So I said, you know what? This formula of this 101, I think this Nintendo Switch is powerful enough that if you had something like 100 racers in SNES style graphics, or maybe like 50 in N64, or 20 or 30 like GameCube, just have it as battle royale. This makes sense. I think this would work with F-Zero. 100 racers at a time, go race, boom. Now I didn't know that this was going to happen, but I had
That's
this. I
awesome.
had this talk. I had this talk at E3 2019 also,
Okay.
and then eventually, I think late 2019 is when Tetris 99 came out. Now I didn't really think, oh yeah, maybe an F-Zero 99 would work right away. Even though a year and a half earlier I was like, yeah, an F-Zero 100. I didn't have a name in my head. I just had this basic concept of it wouldn't take much horsepower to have it. And you could have it online and race and be fun and crazy and chaotic. But then later on afterwards, going into 2020 and pandemic and having some conversations like, what about this old thing, this F-Zero idea, 99 with Tetris? What about that as a future one? And then, I've been on other podcasts, in the last year, half a year, talking like, man, F-Zero 99 would be perfect. So I was very pleased without having actually known this is going to happen, that this is what we got, because I think this is a testing ground for Nintendo where it's not too big of a budget that they had to put into the game.
Right.
Old assets, spruced up, a nice, smooth online interface, and you just got to hope that enough fans play it, enough word of mouth spreads. How many of the 38 million Nintendo Switch Online members are going to try it? What's going to be the drop off of people who play it one day and are done? People who play it for a week and done, a month and done. Then who is still playing at the 6 month mark? And I think at the 6 month
Yep.
mark, based off of the people who are still playing from day one and or people that have come along the way at the 4, 3, 2, 1 month mark, half a year in, if you're looking at like 950,000 or so players concurrently, Nintendo says to themselves, okay, the F-Zero franchise is strong enough on name, fun enough in personality, strong enough in online community presence that we can greenlight a new, bigger modern day visual project. But so this could already be happening. I don't know, right? They already could be having right now like a GX port in the works or something completely new. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's not, and this is somewhat of a testing ground. And then 2-3 years from now, we get that new F-Zero. That's my level of confidence that I could see that if this does well, which is a really good first 2 days, but if it could continue for half a year, then I think we're back.
I would love to see it. I would love to see it because I think F-Zero brings
Me too.
something unique to the table that Mario Kart doesn't quite do. Again, it's smashing other racers up and some of the danger that comes with that. I think Mario Kart has
Yeah,
implemented some of that, but there's a level of speed and a level of danger and a level of just smashing your opponents because when they're off the board in F-Zero. And I think there's something to that it brings something novel to the table that Mario Kart doesn't quite cover. So I would love to see that happen. My fear, and again, and you've made a great argument for that. I think that reading what you and there's a couple other people that might have changed my mind on this, and I'm going to jump into it this weekend and see for myself. But anytime I see Nintendo, like it's very clear, and again, you're right, especially with franchise like F-Zero, with Mother, there's a very, very loud vocal group of people out there that might not be indicative of the entire audience as a whole.
totally.
I think you're absolutely right there. And I've got to keep that in mind because that's a very different situation than the 2D Mario audience that I was a part of. Like, to be fair,
Hmm.
there is a big difference between there. But I see that, and I see, okay, we clearly have said what we want, which is a new F-Zero game. We've clearly said what we want, which is like a new Donkey Kong Country game. And then Nintendo just puts out this project that they want to put out. And in the back of my head, I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been here before. Oh my gosh, it's the entire post SNES era for me, where they're just going to redefine their gameplay identities away from what I like. And that's selfish, I know, but the customer has a right to be selfish, I feel like. And I just don't want to see a return of that jerk ass Nintendo that's ignoring me, man.
Yeah, I think in general, I'm an optimist. That's how I am. In things in life, people I meet, things I do, games that are on the way,
I'm
companies'
becoming that. The
decisions.
Nintendo Switch has done a long way in pulling me back to optimism in gaming. I've loved this system to death, man.
But even being optimistic, you also have to be realistic.
Sure.
However, hearing the financials of how much money they're making,
Oh my god.
seeing the truth that they have not yet dropped the price of the Nintendo Switch,
Isn't that
having
incredible?
that's amazing. Having experienced 6.5 years as of September 3rd
Oh,
of no droughts,
it's
living
gorgeous.
in the best third-party Nintendo relationship since Super NES, even better when it comes to including indies, which
They repaired the Rift, Paul.
are third parties.
They repaired the
Yep.
Squeenix Rift, the Yamauchi and Square Enix. They repaired that.
Yep. You got Cloud Strife and Super Smash Brothers for
Holy
Wii
hell!
U and 3DS. That was a huge moment. And then you have Final Fantasy 7, 8, 9, coming to Nintendo Switch. Like Nintendo Switch has everything but 13 and 11. Well, and 14. 11, which is online, 13 and 14. Other than that,
I can do without 13, man. I can do without 13. Ah.
with Lightning and
Well,
I
I'll tell
guess
you. Well, keep in
15.
mind, you got to keep in mind though that when I played Final Fantasy 13 for the first time, it was my last Final Fantasy game that I had experienced was Final Fantasy 6. So imagine
Mm-hmm.
the jar of going from 6 to this beautifully rendered tube where I can only go one direction nonstop. It was a big jar to me. So I often feel like maybe
Very different.
I've been unfair to that game. Maybe one day if it comes to Switch, I'll give it another chance.
Yeah, I think franchises grow, and then sometimes they don't grow in the way you want. But
That ain't no shit.
if you switch your brain off, which maybe you shouldn't do, but it's like I liked Final Fantasy 16, but Final Fantasy 16 is very different than Final Fantasy. Let's call it 10. Okay,
To be fair, every
but
Final Fantasy is very different from one another.
yeah, but I mean, like this one's probably the most. Okay, this is an action game, man. I mean, it's an RPG in some sense with its building and mechanics and very heavy on story and character development, but it's an action game. However, I like it because I like something very similar called Bayonetta and Devil May Cry. So even
Oh
though
gosh, I love Bayonetta.
this isn't the typical Final Fantasy turn-based or even like 7 remake kind of game with a party of 4 and I can control and all that kind of stuff? No, but I like it because I like DMC titles. So, maybe what was I getting at? I guess like, with certain franchises, I think we hold to it more if that series doesn't get a new entry as often. I'll clarify that. Like, if you get Mario every couple of years, you're probably more forgiving if the next Mario game isn't your cup of tea or they deviated
Agreed.
because that Mario's going to be back.
100%.
But if you don't get a Metroid that often, and the first, like, let's say you're really sensitive to first-person shooters, and then after that long wait from Super Metroid, the next Metroid game you got was Metroid Prime. Gosh, you had to wait all the way until Other M to see Samus in third person again, and even that wasn't 2D. But like, you know what I mean? Like,
that game. Oh.
But for some people, they would have skipped that on the whole Prime trilogy because of that first person thing, or like Donkey Kong. If you liked Donkey Kong Country 1, 2, 3,
right.
Okay, 64, cool. And then the next one is with bongos. Now I thought
that's literally the reaction I had. And this bongo game keeps coming up because I shit on that game so hard, and everybody's like, "No, Zoo, you've got to just play it. You've got to play it."
It was good, and it came out on Wii eventually.
Oh boy.
Jungle Beat on Wii, and you didn't have to do drums, so it wasn't quite playing like Donkey Kong Country, but It was closer to that than it was on GameCube. And like, that's a really solid game, but yeah, when you love a franchise and their entries are more spread out, it kind of hurts more when it's not for you because like, oh, I'm gonna have to wait 6 more years.
Or if
I feel that way with like,
if you're starved from your game for like 10 plus years, like your type of game.
Yeah, I feel that's kind of that's why I'm gonna sidetrack for a moment. I can't help it.
No, okay.
Ninja Turtles, I feel like that. I'm an OG Ninja Turtles fan, and I grew up liking the old school black and white comics, the 80s cartoon, the 2000s animated cartoon on Fox, the one in between, the live action, the 2012s like CG ones. So like I've had plenty of Turtles. When Rise came out in like 17 or 19 or something, it was very different. They changed up the character of Splinter a lot. They made Leonardo like a second Michelangelo. They made Raphael the leader. They really changed it up. Some people were complaining so much, crying so much that they mess with Turtles. And I'm like, dude, this thing's been around for 30 years. Just wait like 2 more years and they're going to reboot it again. You can read the IDW comics. Like, it's going to be fine. And then sure enough, they came out with a new movie. They're going to have a new series. The comics are still strong. You still have your Cowabunga collection. You have your Shredder's Revenge. Like, it's okay. So for some franchises, I think you could be a little bit more forgiving when they experiment because they'll come back. They have too many fans to not satisfy. Too many fans that helped build them that they know they're not going to ever leave.
And that's the thing. And I'll tell you, I can literally chart the reduction in my bitterness. And anybody who knows me will tell you that as when Breath of the Wild came out, when Dread came out, once I got those games, it was like a relief valve was lifted. And so now it's not even to the point where I'm to the point where now that I'm getting my Zelda games, I know there are some people who like that Zelda game, that more Anuma style Zelda game. And I kind of, and I think there's room for the franchise to have both, honestly. The last thing I want, same with 3D Mario. Do I want to see 3D Mario fans? Do I want to see Anuma Zelda fans go 18 years without a game, a fucking game and their preferred type? No, I don't. And I think there, especially with 3D Mario, but also with the Anuma Zelda, there's easily 3 to 5 million people, easy, that will buy that Skyward Sword, Wind Waker style Zelda game. Absolutely, there is. And so serve all markets. I would love to see Zelda differentiate a little bit, as long as I don't have to go without my game for another 20 years.
Yeah, and I don't think we will because Nintendo. This is
not.
this we're dealing with peak Nintendo right now. With
God, yes.
How well they've done with third party relations, and like I said, not having to drop the sales price, everything, you know, saying that, hey, over the next several years, we're going to put $1 billion into software. And that is a lot of money to let investors know, to let us know they're cooking on stuff. They're making big projects. Their new Japanese building, it was supposed to come out in 2024,
Yeah, I
like
saw that.
another new building. And it got postponed because they're going to add, more floors to it. It's going to become bigger. So that's not even being used yet. So they're hiring more folks. Nintendo is getting to becoming a large company because they're not as big as like Microsoft on Sony in terms of all of the locations throughout the world. They have, some core ones and they have people that work, remote here and there, but they're not a giant company. Yet they have some of the most recognizable things in the world. And like anyone who has, Nintendo doomed, maybe I could see why some people had that fear, but like nowadays, nothing to worry about.
Well,
With the
and
movie
yes,
being a 1.35 billion selling movie, with the Super Nintendo World having two parks out, another one coming to Florida, another one coming to Indonesia, believe,
so
or Singapore.
so exciting.
Um, that's going to be four. Like, dude, and Donkey Kong Country or Donkey Kong expansion coming to to Japan, Florida, and most likely in the LA one's back lot, breaking down that sound studio stage to make more room for it. The future is good, and you can just see how Nintendo's also been branching out with partnerships. They've always been pretty good with partners and expanding the brand and letting have Target have some access to some clothing line, Hot Topic and stuff. But look at the last several years, right alongside Nintendo Switch has been this Nintendo and Vans. They never had a partnership until the last several years, and they had the
Right.
Vans line of shoes. Nintendo and Puma with the Super Mario 64 shoes. We've had McDonald's before, yes, but never Lego. That was brand new. Uh, you know, what's it called? Cold Stone Creamery, another one for ice cream. Yogurtland, another
Delicious,
one
by
for
the way.
for frozen yogurt, right? And some of these look like yeah, but when you really add them up, okay, clothing line, yeah, but with Levi's, that Levi's line of Super Mario Brothers denim jacket. I mean, that's what I wore at Nintendo Live, by the way. Uh,
Nice. That's
that the
awesome.
full denim suit.
I saw that.
Levi's, big company, and Uniqlo, and some higher end black milk clothing line like partnerships, and not just Mario. So that's the other thing. It usually was Mario that got these partnerships. Now it's still Mario pretty heavily, but you're starting to get some DK in there. You're getting some Zelda. Splatoon has gotten very big
Oh,
as a new IP.
especially in Japan, huge disruptor.
Huge. Animal Crossing is bigger than it's ever been, and that's one of the ones that you would see Animal Crossing on these. Oh gosh, what's it called? Oh man, I buy them for my kids once in a while. What Lunchables? You know,
Yeah.
like Lunchables and cereals. Like, dude, this is peak Nintendo. Now, what we really care about, what most people care about, is probably, well, yeah, that's all fine, but I want the games. I'm a
Sure.
gamer. I don't care about all the other stuff. But I think if you become a Nintendo fan, you're probably a fan of the overall IP. And there's certain things that
Correct.
cross over. Like if you like video games, you probably like TV shows. And if you're a Zelda fan, who wouldn't want to watch a good quality Zelda
Hey,
TV series?
also that Zelda show is better than
Come on.
people give it credit for. Go back and
Oh, the
watch it,
old
folks.
school.
Yes. Excuse me,
Yeah.
princess. Go back and watch it, folks. There's some actual good quality stuff in there, and I promise you, absolutely, go back and watch that show. But the other thing I would just say is, yeah, I have a vested interest in Nintendo doing well because Nintendo, at the end of the day, is the only real video game company outside of, I don't even think Bethesda can do it anymore. That can draw me into this hobby the way it does. There's just not, Origin Systems is long gone with Ultima. Bethesda is they're never going to hit what they hit with Morrowind in my mind again. It's Nintendo, and peak Nintendo is the best Nintendo. And what I would tell people is you got to also look at the macroeconomic environment that we're going into. Very turbulent macroeconomic waters, and Nintendo's very cautious of that. Nintendo has always kind of been a very cautious company in terms of the way it handles its money, and much to its benefit. One of the things that I always see is that with the new hybridization of their console, they no longer have that second pillar, that dedicated handheld market to prop up a new hardware transition. And so that's kind of why I see the theme parks going, the deals you mentioned, the Nintendo World theme parks, the movies. That's going to be that new second pillar for Nintendo that's going to help ease them into the next transition. And if people can't, I mean, you don't have some folks will say, yeah, I only care about the games, but you also have to care if you care about Nintendo's games, you also have to at least understand and respect what that long term strategy is. Console transitions are very dangerous. Nintendo knows this better than anybody, and so
Yeah,
yeah,
unfortunately, despite being, I think, the overall best video game company in terms of hardware and software, and you look at that decline, and it goes NES, SNES, N64, GameCube, and if you took out Wii U is right in line. It's a
absolutely.
perfect line that goes down, and that's sad to see and crazy to see because each generation, some of the best games per generation are on Nintendo. Plenty of those years, the best game of the year was Nintendo. Yet the market got bigger and the audience expanded and the pie started to spread and change. And then, Nintendo Switch, the best decision they made was merging that hardware and software division together and that home console and portable console division together, because now everybody who's developing the games understands the hardware more because they're a part of that process, and vice versa. Not here's the system, build for it. It's what do you need in this system to build here? I have this idea of a game, I need the following. So when you're working back and forth, and we saw a little bit of that, I mean, this is a kind of different story, but with Capcom, Capcom's partially responsible for, why Nintendo Switch has 4 gigs of RAM instead of 3. It was kind of recommended early on by that third-party respected peer. We really think that you should do 4 instead of 3.
And Nintendo said
Oh,
done. Yeah.
I don't know if I.
Oh, I can hear it.
Okay, cool.
But yeah,
Yeah.
And Nintendo said done. Yeah.
And so that's good. And so now they have that open communication and that amount of trust that they're willing to change things with a third party. So imagine with the internal studios, if this is the conversation that they're having, it's just that much better. Wii U was tough because you think about it, PlayStation, Sony, Microsoft, Capcom, Konami, Activision, Ubisoft, everybody started making quote unquote HD games because Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, they were HD type platforms because it was 720p. That was the HD at the time.
Very expensive.
But they started
very expensive.
They began taking into consideration how much effort, how much money, how much extra time it took to make HD games starting in 2004.
Mm-hmm.
For this,
I would argue that Nintendo was very wise in putting off the HD generation because we watched HD gaming budgets started right when the economic downturn started in 2008, and it swallowed companies whole, Paul.
But the only thing is that also meant they didn't start until 2010, and that's why Wii U had droughts because they didn't anticipate. And to get these files high enough, Pikmin 3 probably shouldn't have come out 7 months, 8 months after New Super Mario Bros. U,
So that decision kind of had reciprocating effects, you're saying, on the Wii U then, and I could see that for sure, yeah.
I think on the one hand, they saved themselves with costs in developing on Wii, but then again, you could also say they put more cost into the R&D and to make things like the Wii Fit work. The Wii Remote work, the Nunchuck work. So it's just where do you put your money? And they banked on that, and they were very successful with that. But with Wii U, Oh,
Well, and
it's
Nintendo, yeah, they've always been an integrated hardware and software company. And traditionally speaking, I know this is my time as an investor, briefly with Nintendo, but essentially, it's the hardware is typically finished, and the hardware is typically waiting on the software. It's typically the software pipeline. I know they ran into some difficulty on that on the GameCube, actually. But yeah, it's typically hardware's done, software pipeline is going. And so yeah, I can definitely see that, especially, if you haven't already had the experience in the HD era, definitely.
yeah. But now, Nintendo switches their software run. Is their software year sophomore, sorry. Sophomore year. It's their second attempt at a, you know, HD platform. They got a little bit roughed up with Wii U. This time, they knew they had good games with Wii U, so I was happy for the ports. I mean, I was a very happy Wii U owner. I still have it, and I had a great time for those 4 years that I had that
Well,
system.
and
Before Nintendo Switch
yeah,
came out.
and that's what makes the
But
Switch such a damn revelation to me is I didn't have a lot of these systems, Paul. So these are all new. I didn't have a Wii U. I didn't have a PlayStation 2 except, you know, when I had access to one every once in a while from a friend borrowing one. So you're talking about, you know, a revelation. I mean, I think it was the PlayStation 2 Mini where I finally actually owned the console in
so,
some form and never really played it. Never really played it aside from I played a game called it was a Shin Megami Tensei game. It was a Raito Kuzunoha Devil Summoner versus King Abaddon. Raito Kuzunoha versus
mm,
King Abaddon. Awesome game, fantastic freaking game that a friend gave me to play. And then the Silent Hill games, some
yeah,
of them briefly, So, in general, a lot of my experience with the Switch is getting to experience all of these new games.
yeah. At a time, if you just had one system, you were either missing out on all of these Nintendo games, like you weren't getting your, Zelda, Metroid, Mario, Donkey Kong, etc. If you had like Sega or PlayStation, for instance.
Right.
But if you were Nintendo, you weren't getting, um, at a time, Tomb Raider, Crash Bandicoot, these other Final Fantasies, Street Fighter, and Mortal Kombat. After a while, Assassin's Creed, these Batman games, Grand Theft Autos, etc. But Nintendo Switch, because Nintendo always banked on themselves and made the games, a lot of these other companies, they're now putting their games on Nintendo Switch. So now it's become this system that, for the current day, is getting most of the big releases that come out elsewhere, like Mortal Kombat 1, for instance, and Doom Eternal and Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball Fighters, just random examples. But it's also getting some stuff from the past. Whereas you'll never have PlayStation or Xbox get Super Mario Sunshine. You'll never have one of these other consoles, legally get Star Fox 64 on their digital player base. So really, Nintendo has become that. I think this is the best place to game, and
Absolutely.
the thought of Nintendo Switch 2, if all of these rumors are correct with how powerful it is and taking advantage of DLSS, 3.1 or so, and not necessarily being the strongest on paper, but having quite effective results comparable to other platforms, thanks to modern technology, and it has that backwards compatibility. I mean, we could just be looking at the smoothest transition into a new generation console that we've ever had. And like, if Nintendo Switch did a good job capturing a good amount of Xbox One, PS4 titles, I think Nintendo Switch 2 is just going to be that much better, which means it's going to last that much longer. Like, I don't want to get disappointed and think, oh yeah, it's going to get everything, but I could see, Elden Ring being something that they use to show off. Maybe a
Oh,
Final Fantasy
oh, don't
7.
don't tempt me with a good time. That would be incredible. Now I do have Elden Ring on the PC, but Elden Ring on the go, like without a battery life of 20 seconds, would be incredible.
Picture Elden Ring, Nintendo Switch, and they do what they did with Skyrim. They say, you know what? We're going to give you Link's tunic in Elden Ring. Bam.
Well, yeah,
Oh.
because it's already again. It's when I will tell you when Zelda went off the rails. In my opinion, my go-to Zelda experience was the FromSoft games. That was that old
Mm-hmm.
school, hard as nails, Dark Fallen World Zelda experience that I absolutely adored. I played the hell out of those games. Um, all of the Souls games. So Elden Ring coming home with a Master Sword and a Link's tunic would be like I would day one. That would be like it all coming full circle coming home. So I
And I,
can't. So I
I think
can't.
if you're Nintendo, you want that.
Oh
You
God,
want
yes.
this is how powerful our system is. Sorry, I knew you were just about to say. Go ahead.
Well, I've kept you a little bit over here, so I don't want to let you
That's
go
okay.
here without at least going over. We both have a love of a television show, Cobra Kai.
Oh
And
yeah.
so I have to pick your brain. Where do you now? I know there's the strike going on right now, and so we're probably going to be have that delayed at least a little bit. But where do we think the
Yeah.
story's going on this? So full spoilers for if anybody's listening that wants to watch Cobra Kai or get into Cobra Kai. Now's your warning. 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So with Kreese literally escaping from fucking prison, where do you see this story going from here? Like, okay, Silver's in jail.
Dang.
Kreese is out of prison. So is Kreese going to be the final boss, or is Kreese going to try to make amends? What do we think?
I could see Kreese going that good guy route possibly. Now that he's out, and like you go from rooting against to rooting for, but he's the lesser of two evils between him and Silver.
Oh my God,
Uh,
Silver is just such a great villain.
Great, really good character, like good character, great acting. I think it's awesome. I think I'm going to rewatch, like when they announced that here is season 6, and season 6 is going to come out in like when I know like 60 days in advance or whatever the amount of time is.
Right.
I'm going to do a 1 episode a day semi binge to lead up.
Oh, me
But I don't know.
too.
I think
I'm so
they
I'm so
they've
pumped.
they've got to go to this world tournament, because they didn't get to do that. But the show is still called Cobra Kai. So will Johnny go back and take it as his own? Can he restructure it, or is he gonna stick to Eagle Fang?
Eagle
Like,
Fang.
so I don't know if I'm in Los Angeles, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And I told you I'm a university professor, right?
Right.
But where I teach Shotokan karate and other martial arts is in California State University, Northridge. That is
Oh my God.
that is
In
in
the
the valley.
valley. You're in the valley. Oh, that's awesome, dude.
Every day I walk by the Matadome, which is the basketball
Shit.
court where, and as a karate kid fan, that was where their
Right.
All Valley
Uh-huh.
challenge was. So
Oh
this
my
is my
God.
neck of the woods. So like Reseda here, Encino there, like these are my neighborhoods. These are
Oh
the
my
places that I go.
gosh. So that show takes on
So
a certain emphasis, a special
oh
emphasis
man,
for you.
growing up as a kid here and seeing Karate Kid here,
Oh
and
my gosh.
knowing these locations, and then going to school. So I went to school at CSUN
How
from
could you how
2001 to.
could you not get into martial arts?
How could I not? I didn't even. So I told you like the Street Fighter angle, the Ninja Turtle angle,
But now you
but
got the Karate Kid angle.
I was like, now this whole thing. So this is really cool. I made it as a short. Nothing really happened with it, but I actually pitched to Cobra Kai. Okay, Cobra Kai, folks. Sensei Paul Gale here, the real sensei of the San Fernando Valley. What do you think about me having a cameo, please, in season 5? But season 5 was like already wrapped up, so I'm like, oh man, I would
Season
love to
6.
get this in season 6. Like, let me have a cameo. I could be a homeless person on a bench. I could be somebody that's just walking by with a nod, or like the fantasy in my mind is like, you know, Daniel LaRusso is talking to his students. So what are you going to do next? Well, sensei, I heard that CSUN has a good karate program. Oh, Sensei Paul Gale, yeah, good guy. And like,
There we go. Yeah, that's a
that,
tie-in too, man.
that would be so freaking cool. And it would make sense because some of these kids are seniors graduating. Where
Uh-huh.
would they go next? Like, we did hear some real life, like, I think UCLA was the recommended school of choice that Daniel LaRusso wanted his daughter to go to.
Okay.
But like, no, no, man, CSUN, dude, stick to the valley. I'm the professor.
Oh,
So I,
yes.
jo- I joke with my wife, like, dang, would it be so cool? Because there are, plenty of karate schools in the valley,
Mhm.
but there is only one university in the valley. So you know, I was fortunate enough to get this position after being a student myself and then helping with the karate program. I got to take over in 2020. So now it's been, mine for the last eight semesters, almost 4 years when the semester is over. How poetic would it be? Oh, dang.
Oh, that
So,
would be incredible. And
if anyone out there is listening and like, let this writer strike end and all that stuff. And hey, you know how to find a way to get me as a cameo in that movie. I could change my name. It doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't have to be like, oh, Paul Gale for real life stuff, but just the fun little Easter egg
just
that
work me
not
in, man.
everybody, not everyone will know, except for like former students and like, well, you and people that hear me talk online about games and stuff. But it's not a giant pool like getting a major celebrity to be a cameo in the show. But hey, pay me $1 and I'm good.
Well, I tell you,
Man.
I can't wait for the show to come back. And actually, as I'm sipping, I've been sipping all night on this 18-year-old Japanese whiskey. Not quite as good as the whiskey that Terry Silver shared
Uh-huh.
with Chosen, but I think that was a 50-year. But 18 years pretty good. So I got to tell you, so I guess before we get off here, do you have any questions for me? I always like to give the guests a chance to ask any questions you might have for me.
When do you think Nintendo? I guess two questions.
Mhm.
Yeah. When do you think Nintendo Switch? Okay, two questions, but you could spin it multiple ways. When do you think and when do you want Nintendo Switch 2 to come out? And what do you think and what do you want the launch title or titles to be on Nintendo's side? So
So
maybe possibly four questions, depending
yeah,
on how you.
so when do I want the Switch 2 to come out? Well, I want them to stick with the Switch. Again, I'm that stubborn old codger, and I eventually they will drag me kicking and screaming to it. But I love my Switch, man. Now backwards compatible will go a long way for that. But in
Yeah.
terms of when I think we're going to get a Switch, OJ and I have been going back and forth on this for a while, and I'm going to stick with 2025. And the reason I'm going to stick with that, there's several
Mm-hmm.
reasons. One, there's battery tech bottleneck. Now I know that some of the chips can, um, it's been pointed out to me, some of the chips can take some of that power, um, that energy suck and make that less. So it's not necessarily all about battery tech, but we are in a battery tech bottleneck. Have been in battery tech hasn't really improved since 2016, 2017. We've got very turbulent macroeconomic conditions, which seem to only be getting worse. I think Nintendo is going to be mindful of that. It's the fact that the pipeline of games, like if you look at Splatoon came out in 2022, at the tail end of 2022. That is a game that's going to get at least 5-6 years of active support. The side order is just coming out. You've got
Mm-hmm.
the Zelda Tears of the Kingdom that just launched this year. That's a game you would normally launch a system with. Mario Wonder, the big fat ass 2D Mario game, that is the mother of all killer apps to launch a console with. It's coming out now. So I guess like what can the Switch launch with I mean, I guess Mario Kart's probably ready, Mario Kart 9. But
Yeah.
that's gonna be a sustaining innovation on Mario Kart 8, and I think it's gonna be hard. I mean, it'll move the hardcore Nintendo fans over, but I find it. I If anybody can think of it, it would be Nintendo. I've said this over and over again, but my brainlet self finds it really hard to imagine what they could possibly do to move the large bulk of Mario Kart 8 fans who are at the good enough point. They're at that sustaining innovation where they've hit that good enough curve. What's going to move them over to a Mario Kart 9? I don't know. 3D Mario has proven with Odyssey finally that it is a proven system seller. I think there was a 50% attach rate in 2017, but I don't know. I can't see 3D Mario being a better system seller than 2D Mario, and the 2D Mario's out on the Switch. Pokemon, Rush Dog likes to say Pokemon. If you put out a brand new Pokemon game, a new generation of Pokemon, you can stick a fork in anything. And that system's going to sell like gangbusters. But I think that given Nintendo companies, Pokemon companies, um, their answers, I think we're probably getting pretty close to 2025 before that game's available. And again, hardware will launch when the software is available. So I'm going to stick with 2025. I know I'm betting against Eurogamer on that. OJ has told me that repeatedly. But that's the fun of these things is if I'm wrong, and
Yeah.
I've always said it's okay to be wrong, it's you just have to recalibrate and kind of recalibrate your view on reality. If you're incorrect, let's find out why I was incorrect. So I'm going to stick with it just for the fun of the bet, and we'll see if OJ and the Eurogamer are right. But I got to tell you a lot on the line here, Paul, because I think OJ's got me 2 out of 3 now. And so
Uh,
if he gets me on this one, it is definitely time for a recalibration on my the way I view the games industry. It's been
yeah.
it's been long overdue. I've been fucking right for a long time, and the Nintendo Switch. I knew the Nintendo Switch was going to be a success, but I questioned Tears of the Kingdom just because in the back of my head I'm like, okay, is Anuma going to go back to his Anuma ways? I questioned that. I questioned Pikmin 4, and Pikmin 4 has fucking exploded.
Yeah.
So this will be number 3. This will make me a 3-time loser in terms
Well,
of
you
if I'm
know.
wrong on this. So we'll see. I know I'm taking an awfully risky betting against Eurogamer, but damn, these macroeconomic waters are getting turbulent. I can't even keep a decent yield ahead of the average market doing my sector rotation strategy. So I find it very hard to believe that anybody would be bold enough to launch given what's going on.
Mm. If someone's gonna make it work, it's Nintendo.
it
But
would be
you
Nintendo.
know, in some ways, they're really in no rush because they've never had a system that in its seventh year was selling 15 million units as a home console, and that's what Nintendo Switch is. And
And we
like,
haven't
even
even had
if
the price cut yet.
nope, and then in the next year after this, going into the eighth, once it turns 7, it'll be in its eighth. Even if it sells 10 million, you realize 10 million is like half of what GameCube did in its whole 5-year life from
Yes.
2001 to when Wii came out. So when is 10 million all of a sudden bad? It's just not as good as Nintendo Switch peak, 29 million or anything like that. But 10 million is still not bad. For people that are hungry for oh, I need the new graphics, new graphics. A lot of it is the vocal minority.
Yes, absolutely.
My
I've
my
said that
my
for
my
years, man.
my kids' friends, some of my casual friends, none of them have complained about the way any Pokemon game looks, Tears of the Kingdom looks, how this new Mario looks, etc. Online, you see people counting pixels and like, oh, it's 30 frames, oh, it's 900p instead of 1080p, this. But guess what? They're all still selling, and most people are still happy because indies are still finding success, as is
Yeah.
Nintendo and third parties. So, do you mean to tell me that, like, what would you rather have? A Nintendo Switch 2 come out powerful next year with a couple of games and not quite have enough software to be like bam, 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 bam in a row and make you wait, kind of like it was back in the day? Or Nintendo Switch 2 come out in a few years and next year you get a new Star Fox and a new Punch Out and that brand new
Oh,
F
I hope
Zero
so.
and a Kid Icarus game and uh you know a new Golden Sun and, like, you know what I mean? So like, there's
Oh, for sure.
untapped franchises that they could resurrect. And overall, we play games and we buy consoles to play the software, and that's the most fun, most important part. But it's just tough for a certain group of gamers that, like, the rest of the world goes on with bigger and better graphics, and like, you want to play these games still, but also want to play them on bigger and better
Well,
looking
yeah, and
visuals. So
and
I understand that too.
And again, it's the
I
graph
do.
I always show on Twitter. It's that diminishing returns of sustaining innovations graph, and that's the thing, man. Yamauchi put it best. His wisdom speaks true, which is the console is just a box we buy to get to Mario or to whatever games. And that was a famous Yamauchi quote. Yeah, I would rather them wait and do it when it's ready. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's one thing I hope. Do it when it's ready. The question is going to be, are they ready in 2024 or 2025?
I I
I
I'm feeling 2025, but again, I could be wrong on that for sure. So, well, I tell you, it's been a hell of a good conversation, Paul. Definitely have to have you back at some point. But I got one more question for you before you go.
Sure.
Did you have fun?
I had a lot of fun talking
Fantastic.
with you. Last hour 45 minutes went by really fast. Like, I appreciate the conversation. That was a good time. That was a
Always,
lot of
man.
fun.
Hey, you're welcome back anytime, man. We'll definitely have to have you on for a round two. So I'm gonna take one last cheers drink to you, and then we will go offline. And if you want to stick around real quick for a little bit of a denouement, we'll end the stream. But thanks everybody for coming out, and take care and game on, guys. And bear
Bye.
and